Patience is wearing thin for thousands waiting in lines for hours at airports, but congressional leaders tell us a deal may be close. A suspicious surge in oil trades just before President Trump's announcement halting missile strikes were people trading with inside information. Secretary of State Marco Rubio takes the stand in the criminal trial of a friend accused of illegal lobbying for Venezuela. Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in for Major Garrett, and welcome to the Takeout. Airports in some of our nation's largest cities are reaching a breaking point. One signal of how bad it's gotten, an intractable Congress is showing signs of movement towards a deal. Ground zero for delays is Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, where passengers have been waiting for 240 minutes with 4 hours of lines snaking through multiple terminals. At Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, 37% of TSA workers called out. This is the nation's busiest airport. And this Friday will mark the second paycheck TSA workers could miss. On Monday, nearly 11% called out, and more than 450 TSA officers have quit since the start of the partial shutdown 38 days ago. Finally, on Capitol Hill, where many Americans lay blame, progress. A new offer was put forth by Republicans to fund most of the Department of Homeland Security and separate it from ICE, and funding for the agency's enforcement and removal operations. Late today, our Torian Small spoke with Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who responded to the offer.
This does not have any reforms in ICE, but they've sent us, negotiations are ongoing, and they've sent us an offer, and we'll be sending them an offer back. And I can assure you it'll contain significant reform in it.
Starting us off tonight in Houston is Nicole Skanga, who has watched as thousands have stood in extremely long lines. Nicole, set the scene for us.
Yeah, Nicole, not only have we watched, but we ourselves have stood in lines this morning. We stood in a line for 3 hours in Terminal A. We're in Terminal E now. We're going to pan the camera so you can see, in addition to the 3 levels of security here, it is both inside and also outside of this terminal here. And these travelers behind me say they've been waiting in line for approximately 2 hours. They've got a little ways to go here, and it has been another busy, crazy day at IAH, with travelers calling this frustrating, annoying, even dangerous, as the line begins in the basement subway corridor that has limited AC and access to water, food, and cell service. Folks online down there rebooking their flights frantically. Now, as for who passengers say is to blame, no one I've spoken with of the travelers here say it's the TSA workers' fault. In fact, many place the blame squarely on Capitol Hill. Take a listen to Anthony McDonald. I met him online today. He was traveling with his infant daughter. Here's what he had to say.
What's your message to lawmakers on Capitol Hill who need to strike a deal in order to pay TSA workers?
Come out here and get in line. Come on out here and get in line, Capitol. We love you guys. Like she said earlier, we're disordinary. It's real. But I would tell them that, honestly, I would say, let's get a move on it. Let's pick it up so we can do better. Our people we need you guys.
And Nicole, a lot of frustration that while TSA workers go without pay, members of Congress are getting paid.
Yeah, and they're also starting to lose some of their privileges in terms of getting through the airport. But that gentleman you spoke to also sounds like he wants a record deal. But meantime, what role is ICE having there and at other airports across the country?
Yeah, trying to keep spirits up there. And in fact, ICE personnel also handing out water bottles today, offering some direction and words of encouragement, along with the airport staff that is out in full force. In fact, we talked to some of the airport members that usually sit behind desks, but they're out wearing neon shirts today, sort of directing traffic. As for what ICE personnel have been assigned to do, they cannot replace a TSA officer one-to-one. And that's some of the concern here, right? TSA officers, there are over 3,200 who called out sick today, over 450 who have quit during this last shutdown alone. Takes a lot of training to become a TSA officer, 4 to 6 months for every officer. So the concern that as these shutdowns continue, and we've seen 3 in just about 6 months, more and more TSA personnel will hang up the towel, will say they don't want another government shutdown, and we're going to be facing a serious challenge here at our airports.
All right, Nicole Skanga, you hang in there, and obviously those passengers there, like you said, trying to keep their spirits up, and the TSA officers for that part, too. We thank you so much for your reporting tonight.
Thank you.
And we turn now to Torian Small, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. Torian, how is this new offer to split off some of ICE funding from the broader DHS budget going over with lawmakers?
Well, Nicole, Senator Blumenthal mentioned something that I think is quite poignant. He said he never uses the word optimistic when it comes to Capitol Hill, because we've seen just from this morning to this afternoon a really big shift in where opinions stood. At the start of the day, we were talking to lawmakers who were quite happy about or optimistic about where things were going with negotiations, saying they believed a deal came out of the White House that would be pretty much appetizing to folks across the aisle. Once Democrats saw the language of that proposal from Republicans is where we got this disagreement. We heard from Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, today during a press conference. He said that this deal as it stands just isn't quite meeting the moment. He said that it didn't address the concerns, the chief concerns they had about immigration reforms. And Senator Kaine actually broke that down for us. So the two main components of ICE are HSO or HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigation, and then ERO, which is essentially operations. And this would fund HSI while not funding ERO. That second part would essentially go through the budget reconciliation process. I asked Leader Thune about whether or not reforms would still be a part of the conversation if this deal did go through and they would pursue reconciliation on their own. This is what he had to say.
Well, I mean, I think that's going to be up to them. The reform, honestly, this has all been about reforms that they said they wanted, and we have repeatedly showed up. They have repeatedly backed away, including over this last weekend. And it became very clear to us that they really weren't interested in reforms.
It appears leverage is at the heart of these negotiations. With a few days left before recess, it appears both sides are really looking to needle the other side into seemingly giving up concessions or giving into concessions before they ultimately decide on voting on a package. But we'll still be watching some of those moderate Democrats who voted to end the previous government shutdown to see if their opinions have changed at all in the past couple of hours. Nicole.
And then real quick, Torian, I just want to ask you, obviously, I know Leader Thune, and, he had mentioned that earlier to me as well today about the reforms, and he felt that Democrats were stalling here. Obviously, Democrats say that they plan to respond to Republicans' offer. Any sense of what Democrats are seeking?
Well, they're maintaining that they want to remove ICE completely, not just one component of it, from this funding bill. I also would note that CBP was also a part of their demands. They didn't want to fund CBP either, just every other agency on the department except for those two. I haven't heard lately if they have moved where they stood on CBP, but this is included in this funding package under the Republican proposal. As it stands, though, even if this goes out of the Senate, this will have to go to the House for its approval. We heard from Speaker Mike Johnson, who said that he was unhappy with the idea of separating this bill. He said he and his conference is prepared to vote fully on this DHS spending bill, but not necessarily separated. So we'll see if that changes, if it makes it to them as it stands right now in this Republican proposal.
All right, Torian Small reporting from Capitol Hill. Thank you so much. And now we want to turn to New York Republican Congressman Nick LaLota, who joins me now. Congressman, thanks so much for being here with us. As you heard our Torian Small mention, Speaker Johnson did tell CBS News earlier today that he prefers not to split off ICE from DHS funding. Let's take a listen.
Supportive of a DHS funding bill that doesn't include funding for ICE.
That is not my preference. I can tell you the House has funded DHS twice. We're prepared to do it again, completely fund the entire department. That is a responsible way to do this thing, so we've been very resistant to any idea to break it apart.
So do you agree with the speaker?
Yeah, the speaker's right. I was with TSA agents this morning at LaGuardia Airport as I flew into Washington here. The speaker's right. We shouldn't separate these issues. The continuing resolution status quo funding for those at home is the medicine that Washington has taken for years and years and years when Democrats and Republicans can't agree on something specific. Now, Democrats don't want any border enforcement. They don't want any immigration enforcement. That's their prerogative as a party. But they shouldn't be able to hold up all sorts of funding in order to try to exercise that prerogative. It's wrong. The speaker's right to focus us all on funding the entire Department of Homeland Security. And where we disagree, let's at least just do status quo funding on things like ICE to ensure that our folks are getting paid, not only in ICE, but DHS, cybersecurity, the Coast Guard, the entire Department of Homeland Security. Funding the whole darn thing is the right way to move forward.
Obviously, we've seen the House do that twice, potentially even being prepared to tee up a third vote this week. But as you know, the dynamics are different in the Senate, where you need those 60 votes. You need Democrats on board, which is potentially why we're seeing this approach and this offer in the Senate. So ultimately, if that's what advances in the Senate, again, splitting off part of ICE from DHS funding, would you be willing to vote in favor of that?
You know, I'll deal with the pitches as they come in, but I heard you ask your previous guest, what do Democrats want? And most people in this town have no idea what Democrats want because they continue to move the goalposts forward. First, it was that they wanted body cameras and more training. Republicans conceded, offered more of that. Then it was things about not having enforcement around churches and courtrooms and schools and more identification of the ICE officers. Republicans offered that as well, and that's still not good enough to have some funding within the Department of Homeland Security. So I don't know what my Democrat colleagues want in this. They've wanted for 15 years to defund the entire ICE. They've wanted to, during the Biden years, have a wide open border. It's frustrating. That's not the policies that voters wanted when they elected Republicans to have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House in 24. They rejected the voters, those open border policies. It's unfair for 8 Senate Democrats to continue to be stubborn on their open border policies.
I know some of your GOP colleagues in the House, particularly in the House Freedom Caucus, have also raised some concerns about potentially putting parts of the SAVE Act or the Save America Act into a separate reconciliation package, which is now also being talked about in the Senate. Do you think that would work?
I'm not sure that mechanically that attaching that good endeavor, which is based upon 2 main principles, 1, voter ID, and 2, guaranteeing that only citizens vote in our elections. Those are great principles that everybody throughout this country should want to embrace. But I'm not sure that attaching that to the already complicated border funding is a way to get both across the finish line. Both should get across the finish line. America wholeheartedly supports only citizens voting in our elections. America wholeheartedly, regardless of Democrat, Republican, or independent, what color you're from, what part of the country you're from. Everybody wants voter ID. We should get those things done. But I'm not sure that pairing them together is the best way to get either or both done.
Obviously, we're now more than a month into this partial government shutdown, and CBS News has been asking all members of Congress what they are doing to end it. So tell us specifically what you are doing to end this shutdown.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, I was at LaGuardia this morning. I met with some folks who are TSA agents from the Association of Federal Government Employees, a good, hard-working unit. They took their oath, and they're right now exercising their oath. They're showing up to work every day, despite missing 3 paychecks now in a row. And these are not 6-figure employees. These are hard-working, blue-collar employees who are trying to make ends meet. It's unfair that this government has failed to pay them for now 3 paychecks. I'm in the Problem Solvers Caucus. I'm eager to work across party lines to ensure that we do the business of this great country. But I'm asking my Democrat colleagues to tell America, what the heck do you want to reopen our Department of Homeland Security? We got to pay our Coast Guard. We got to fund their operations. We have to have solid cybersecurity operations. We should pay our TSA agents. I'm flexible. I can get there. I can sign on to a deal that doesn't give me 100% of what I want, but my Democrat colleagues need to stop moving the goalposts on this issue.
And then just very quickly before we let you go, I know you mentioned that you were at LaGuardia earlier. Obviously, that was the scene of that horrific crash between an Air Canada jet and a fire truck. What more are you learning about that incident?
Yeah, I'm going to reserve my total judgment until the NTSB report comes out. Initially, we're told that staffing levels were appropriate, the training was appropriate. I watched some of this terrible, horrific videos where 2 pilots lost their lives, others injured in this process. We should examine the details that went into that incident. We should want to correct the mistakes that went into that incident. Our airport should be safe. We should fund our TSA agents. We should fund our Department of Homeland Security, and we should ensure that they are as safe as possible.
All right, Congressman Nick LaLota, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Have a good day.
The U.S. and Iran may be moving closer to formal talks to end the conflict. President Trump again insisted today that members of his administration, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are already engaged in negotiations with Iran. He also reiterated the claim that Iran has already agreed to never have a nuclear weapon. Iran has denied that formal talks are underway, but confirmed yesterday it received a message through mediators as a precursor to negotiations. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now. Ed, the president spoke earlier in the Oval Office. Did we learn anything new about the conflict with Iran and the possible talks happening?
We did, because he suggested again, Nicole, that those talks are indeed underway. Wouldn't really get into the specifics of who exactly they're speaking with, but suggested that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, his top envoy, Steve Witkoff, the vice president, the secretary of state, and eventually the president himself would be involved in the conversations. And he broke a little news regarding a signal they got from Iran. Take a listen to some of our exchange with them earlier in the Oval Office.
Do you think I trust them? I don't trust them.
Well, then why bother talking to them?
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money.
What that present is not yet clear. In a follow-up question from our own Jennifer Jacobs, he suggested it has something to do with oil and gas and the Strait of Hormuz. We're still trying to learn more about what exactly it might have been, whether it was something physical, whether it was some kind of control of either part of the strait or some element of oil shipping that is being attempted to occur there through the strait. We'll wait and see if we learn more. Of course, it may not be much of anything, really, other than the president perhaps just suggesting that there is some sense of progress. So as far as he's concerned, the negotiations are progressing, and this comes as several other countries in the region have now expressed a willingness to help make them happen.
And one of those countries being Pakistan, which has now offered to mediate talks. Is the president on board? And do we have any sense of when more formal talks could occur?
Well, he did retruth or retweet or post a statement from the Pakistani government essentially saying that they're willing to host those talks should the president and Iran decide to move forward with them. Remember, Pakistan is another nuclear power in the region to Iran's east, so further into Asia, and obviously is concerned about the situation as well, given it's also a nuclear power and another predominantly Muslim country that has had relations with Iran. So it, along with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf countries, and Turkey especially, given its border with Iran, have been involved, have been in touch with the United States, trying to get these sides to talk and to try to ease hostilities. Whether or not they get serious, whether or not senior U.S. officials get deployed to the region for conversations will remain, we'll keep watch for that. And he again refused, Nicole, to specify who exactly it is he's speaking with in the government because, as he pointed out correctly, they killed the top leadership, they killed the next rung of leadership, but whoever it is, he says, he signaled again today, is someone that they trust and that they're engaging with.
All right. Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. CBS News national security contributor Joe Zaks joins me now. He is also the former Deputy Assistant Director of the CIA for Counterterrorism and currently serves as an adjunct fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good to have you with us, Joe. What do you make of these potential talks, and do you think a deal is possible within the next couple of days?
Well, thank you, Nicole. I think it's a very positive development that is currently underway. I think it's certainly a sincere development on the United States side, and I suspect that the Iranian regime is very interested in exploring all possibilities with respect to negotiations, although I don't expect them to publicly acknowledge this anytime soon. However, I would also caution that the Iranians are tough negotiators and that this could take time, could take a bit of time, especially since the United States wants to come out and should want to come out ahead and in a strong position in these negotiations. So I think it will be important to keep up the military campaign, minus perhaps any attacks on Iranian infrastructure, because I think that could be quite destabilizing to the Gulf partners in the region. So not attacking necessarily Iranian power plants or other infrastructure, I think we can still continue to prosecute the targets that we have and maintain an upper hand in negotiations with Iranians without further destabilizing or destabilizing the Gulf region.
Yeah, but I think to that point, since you said these talks could take a while, do you think the president is willing to extend this 5-day period, if you will, this pause on strikes on Iranian power plants in order to try to keep these negotiations going?
Clearly, his extending or not extending this 5-day pause on Iranian power plants is his decision to make. But in answer to your question, I would think he could easily extend that, especially if he senses that the Iranians are negotiating in good faith and that there's traction. And it'll be curious to find out, which I'm sure we will in the next few days, what exactly the president was referring to with respect to the Iranian presence, so to speak, that they offered.
Yeah, and to Ed's point, not just on the mystery president, but also on this issue of who the U.S. may be negotiating with here, because I think the president earlier this week would only say it's a top person. But what more do we know about the current state of Iran's leadership and who the U.S. might be talking to at this stage?
Well, it seems like the conventional wisdom is that it may be the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament. That's certainly a possibility, and he's comes from essentially a hardline faction of the Iranian regime. But that may not be a bad thing, because he would have credibility and a position from which to negotiate with a hardline government. There could be others. I think time will tell, and I think it may even be better not to speculate too terribly much, so as not to put undue pressure on the Iranian regime to negotiate in good faith.
Well, Joe Zaks, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your expertise and analysis.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Still to come on the Takeout, and oil's future trading surge just minutes before President Trump postpones power plant strikes in Iran. Is it more than just a coincidence? Also, Secretary of State Marco Rubio takes the stand, his testimony in a case against a former congressman accused of secretly lobbying for Venezuela. Plus, the fight between the Pentagon and one of the country's top AI firms, Anthropic, goes to court. What the company is saying about being labeled a national security risk. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back. Market watchers are concerned about potential insider trading due to an unusual surge in oil futures trading on Monday morning. Take a look at this minute-by-minute breakdown. Trading volume remained low until about 6:49 a.m. Eastern, when over just a few minutes, trading volume jumped almost tenfold. That spike went back down until about 15 minutes later, when President Trump announced he was postponing strikes on Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure, and that caused a surge in the oil markets. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger joins me now. And Jill, what is your reaction to the trade jump that we saw Monday?
It seems highly suspicious when you see a surge in volume on no news. Remember, we see a volume surge like this when you have announcement of attacks, or maybe if we had heard something in the war zone that was going to create anxiety among traders. But here we have no news. We have traders basically betting on crude oil going down, which was kind of anti where we were going. That was sort of contra the trend. We were heading up, and then all of a sudden a bunch of people voting on us going down. And then the announcement emerges. And then, in fact, crude oil did plunge by 10%. So it has many people watching this saying, scratching their heads, hey, did somebody actually have information before it was public? Now, listen, this is called insider trading. It is illegal. And under many circumstances, we would see regulators pounce on this, maybe the Commodities Futures and Trading Commission or the SEC if it were a stock. But so far, they have been silent. And I think that silence is deafening.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I think that this administration came in saying they wanted a lighter touch on the regulatory front. And they are getting that in spades. So there are two factors here. If you say the administration says, hey, ease up on regulation, and at the same time, they're basically defunding many of these regulators, whether it's the CFTC or the SEC, it leaves the people who are standing in those organizations with not a lot of power to make investigations. Look, normally this would actually trigger an investigation. We'd find out what happened, and it would be a very methodical process. I think that it is actually not happening tells us that actually maybe something should be happening.
And we've also seen a similar dynamic in some betting markets. Can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, well, listen, I think that it is shocking that we have a free flow of information, and it seems like some people have information before the rest of us do. And you heard me reference insider trading. Now, for some people of a certain age, that's me, Nicole, we're going to remind you that there are people like Martha Stewart who were accused of insider trading 25 years ago, and the regulators pounced on her. Now, she didn't go to jail for insider trading. She went to jail because she lied to prosecutors. That said, the fact that we are having information emerge, whether it's for betting markets, whether it's in financial markets, in the futures markets, I think this really casts a shadow over people feeling like there is an unfair playing advantage. If you have information, you're an insider, you get that information, you make money. The rest of us schlubs have to just invest the plain old long-term investing way in our retirement accounts. And I don't think many people are going to feel good about this, Nicole.
All right. Well, Jill Schlesinger, we know you'll continue to follow it for us. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Coming up, the first sitting cabinet member in 40 years to testify in a criminal case. We'll get the latest from Secretary of State Marco Rubio's appearance in a Miami courtroom. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. The Taliban has released American Dennis Coyle, who was detained in Afghanistan for more than a year. He was apprehended in Kabul during the early days of President Trump's second term after spending nearly 2 decades in the country conducting language research. Afghanistan's foreign minister said Coyle's release can, quote, further strengthen the atmosphere of trust between countries. Coyle's family says they are profoundly grateful to President Trump for securing Dennis's freedom. CBS News immigration correspondent Camilo Montoya Galvez has exclusive new reporting that finds a Venezuelan man who was deported to El Salvador's notorious CBS prison last year is suing the U.S. for damages. He is believed to be the first known ex-prisoner to file such a lawsuit and is seeking $1.3 million in compensation. The 28-year-old told Camilo that prison guards repeatedly beat and mistreated him and other prisoners at CBS. Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, and now witness in an ongoing criminal trial. Marco Rubio appeared in court today in the case against former Miami Congressman David Rivera. Rivera, who is Rubio's former roommate, is accused of illegally lobbying for Venezuela. Rivera denies any wrongdoing. CBS News correspondent Christian Benavidez was in court today and joins me now. So, Christian, tell me, what did Secretary of State Marco Rubio have to say about his relationship with Rivera?
Well, look, Nicole, I mean, they weren't just good friends. In fact, they were roommates, and they owned that house together while they were in the Florida legislature. They were dear, dear friends, and Rivera is accused of using that relationship to be able to get a $50 million contract from the Venezuelan regime. Again, Rubio is not accused of any wrongdoing here. He was called to take to the stand just before 10 a.m. today. He was wearing a dark blue suit, and he was asked in the courtroom by the prosecutors, you know, are you employed? He said, I have two jobs. I'm Secretary of State, and I'm also the National Security Advisor, and that drew laughter from the courtroom. Rubio testified that he and Rivera were very good friends, a friendship that goes back to the 90s. He also testified that he had been unaware that Rivera had been allegedly working with the regime. The U.S. government said Rivera had a $50 million contract with Venezuela and that he had been paid out about $20 million of that. Rivera denies any wrongdoing in this case. And as I said, Rubio is not accused of any wrongdoing.
And what else did we learn about the case against Rivera?
Well, look, for a criminal defendant, Rivera sure was all smiles before heading into court. I spoke to him before he headed in. I asked him how he was doing. He smiled and he said, well, ask me after today's testimony. Rivera is accused of money laundering. He's accused of not registering as a foreign agent. Now, why is Rubio testifying? Well, he held two meetings with Rivera back in 2017. And Rubio says that Rivera said that he could produce a letter from Nicolas Maduro that he would step down and hold free and fair elections. But clearly that did not materialize. The Secretary of State testified about those meetings today and also about his friendship with Rivera.
And what's next in this trial?
Well, look, the trial is expected to last several weeks. As far as Secretary Rubio's role in all this, I mean, that was pretty much it. He gave his testimony in all about 4 hours. He came and he left. I will make note of just how unusual it is, as you noted. I mean, it's not since the Reagan era that we've had a sitting cabinet member testify. And just another note, there were a handful of moments throughout the day in the courtroom, not just that question about whether Marco Rubio was employed, but there was another note at the very end. Once Rubio was done testifying, a defense attorney went up to Rubio and asked if he would autograph an autobiography that he had brought to the courtroom. So really, it was an interesting day, to say the least, here at Miami Federal Court.
Yeah, sounds pretty surreal. Christian Benavidez, thank you so much. Coming up, the court case between the Pentagon and one of the country's top AI firms is officially underway in San Francisco. We'll break down the issues and what's at stake. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The AI company Anthropic is challenging the Pentagon in court today after the Trump administration designated it as a national security risk. Anthropic previously expressed concern with how the military wanted to use its AI models. Here's what CEO Dario Amodei told our Jolene Kent last month.
We believe in defeating our autocratic adversaries. We believe in defending America. The red lines we have drawn, we drew because we believe that crossing those red lines is contrary to American values.
And Tom Dupree joins us now to discuss. He is the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Good to have you as always, Tom. You know, what are we learning about this dispute on how the Pentagon wanted to use Anthropic's Claude AI model, and how does this affect the millions of Americans who use AI every day?
Well, today's showdown in the San Francisco courtroom really implicates the future of AI. And Anthropic obviously was very unhappy when the Pentagon did what it did and designated it a supply chain risk. The president essentially told anyone in the federal government doing business with Anthropic needs to cease immediately. So Anthropic went running into federal court. They're arguing that what the War Department is doing violates its constitutional rights. They're arguing that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, overstepped his legal authority by designating them a supply chain risk and basically trying to cut them out. So those are all the issues that are percolating today, and those are the issues that the judge in San Francisco is going to have to sort out.
Yeah, and I guess just speaking to that, obviously the Pentagon struck a deal with Anthropic's rival ChatGPT, but it's going to take some time to kind of make that transition within the military from Anthropic. So what types of issues could that potentially pose as this legal case plays out?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a moving scenario right now. There are a lot of moving parts. ChatGPT, as you noted, is getting involved. And the thing about Anthropic is that it is very well ingrained in existing military technology. This isn't something where the Pentagon can simply unplug and pull out the Anthropic technology from all their war, machines and technologies and devices. This is something that is going to have to happen over time. And what the federal judge decides today could play a significant role in that. If the federal judge sides with Anthropic, I think it would make it more difficult, frankly, for the War Department to completely excise Anthropic. Whereas if the federal judge agrees with the War Department, well, then Anthropic is going to have a tougher road ahead.
Yeah, and interestingly, we've seen since this falling out with the Pentagon that downloads of Claude have actually increased. So also, how do you see that having an impact as this case plays out?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing here is that I think a lot of people looking at this give a lot of credit, frankly, to Anthropic for standing up to its beliefs, to saying we are the developers of this technology and we don't want it used in certain ways. We don't want it used to conduct mass surveillance on Americans. We don't want it to be used for purposes of automated weapons. And so I think some people in the public say, hey, saying we kind of agree with this. We like these red lines that Anthropic was drawing. And sure, the War Department may not like it and they may punish them, but we as consumers, as Americans, we respect those decisions. And so, well, we're going to download it and use it ourselves.
Is there a precedent for a case like this, or are we flying blind here?
Well, like a lot of things in the new Trump administration, we're making new law. But there is a fair amount of precedent out there, at least about the processes that the government has to follow when it wants to declare a company a supply chain risk. It's not just a matter of the Secretary of War saying, I think they're a risk, I'm signing this document. They actually have to jump over certain bureaucratic hurdles. They have to follow certain procedures. And so while a lot of the attention in this case has gotten focused on the constitutional claims Anthropic is making, a lot of lawyers are keeping their eye on the dustier, maybe more boring, but perhaps ultimately more persuasive to the judge legal arguments that the Pentagon simply didn't follow the legal process they need to follow in this case.
And I'm sure you're one of them who will be following this very closely and
like
enthusiastically, I can tell.
For sure.
All right, Tom Dupree, thank you so much. Steve Bannon thinks sending ICE agents to airports serves as a, quote, test run for the midterms. We'll discuss that and more with our strategist panel. You are watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Let's turn now to our political panel. Democratic strategist Jaime Moore, the former director of DNC Chair Jamie Harrison's office, and Republican strategist Megan Mobbs, who's the director of the Center for American Safety and Security at Independent Women. Thank you both for being with us on a Tuesday. And Megan, I want to start with you. Obviously, we've been talking at the outset of the show about this new DHS funding deal where the Senate's looking to fund part of DHS, but possibly split off ICE. Do you think they can get this done before the end of the week?
I really hope so. I mean, what we're seeing is obviously the major impact on Americans and how it's impacting their ability to just live their lives and travel, for example. We have Easter and spring break coming up, and so it is impacting their ability to do so. So I'm really hoping we can find a pathway here. Obviously, I do believe it's critically important that we do fund ICE, but right now I think we also just need to focus on reducing the burden on Americans and getting it done.
What do you think, though, made the difference here with Republicans? Because up until now, they've been insisting that they didn't want to split off ICE funding. They saw it as defunding law enforcement. So what changed here, do you think?
Well, as often know, like the reality sometimes comes in conflict with our best laid plans. I think they also recognize the significance of what was happening to Americans. And so I think there has to be this kind of necessary back and forth. And I think they ultimately are focused on doing what's right for the American people. That is relieving some of that stress and burden right now, especially for travel, and then hopefully getting it done on the back end. Because like I said before, we do have to fund ICE. We do have to find a path forward for that. And this may be the best of both worlds at this point.
Yeah.
Democrats, though, seem to have a little bit of pause. I mean, we heard from Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today, who said, look, we're going to send an offer back. We heard from Patty Murray, who said, you know, this offer doesn't really cut it. So at the end of the day, will we see Democrats offer some concessions here?
Yeah, I think so. And look, I hope so, too. I think things are getting a little bit too untenuous for the country right now. I mean, we just faced a huge crash at LaGuardia. The lines are getting longer. The TSA agents are not getting paid. This is the third shutdown that we've had to endure in such a short period of time, and no one wins doing the shutdown. And so I think on both sides, Republicans and Democrats are seeing public opinion start to turn, just like the last shutdown. And I think both of them want to make some sort of deal. And so Democrats want to obviously take this as far as possible, and ICE is a huge part of that negotiation. But I do think we're getting closer to a deal, and I hope this is going to be a win-win for both parties.
But what do you think the message is to the base on this? Because, again, this has been about trying to win reforms. And at the end of the day, it seems like Democrats are not going to get nearly what they want out of this deal, particularly around this issue of judicial warrants and, you know, these ICE officers taking off their masks.
Look, I think for Democrats, it's going to be two things. One, they're going to be able to say, look, we are continuing to fight for what we believe is right. We have, for the third time, have posed to the president reasons for them to shut down the government because it doesn't align with what Democrats are trying to do. Two, you know, when you look at what's happened over the last couple of months, you just can't continue this. It's going to continue to get worse. The loss is going to continue to get a lot more tough for people in the communities, particularly those who work for TSA in the airports. And so I think Democrats are looking for an offer right now, and they'll say, at the very least, while we were able to sideline ICE, we were able to get people back working and the government back open.
And speaking of ICE, I do want to play some of what Steve Bannon said about ICE agents, which is on a different matter. But he suggested that, you know, ICE agents are being deployed at airports potentially as a test run or a sign of things to come for the election. Let's take a listen.
I want the mainstream media's head to blow up today. We can use what's happening with these ICE helping out at the airports. We can use this as a test run, as a test case to really perfect ICE's involvement in the 2026 midterm election, sir?
Yeah, I think we should have ICE agents at the polling places because if you're an illegal alien, you can't vote.
I mean, do you think there's something to this here?
Well, first off, I think this is so silly and it is so problematic that we're going to even begin talking about this. The president and the administration have been very clear that ICE was put in the airports to do what was necessary regarding security. They also made it very clear they weren't going to be doing anything like screening because they weren't trained to do so. And so this fear-mongering around having ICE do law enforcement functions in the airport in order to relieve burden on the American people is hugely problematic. And we should be pushing back against that and saying, no, this is not a weaponization of ICE. This is a utilization of their law enforcement function. It reduces burden on TSA so they can do the necessary screening to make sure lives are saved, to protect the American people traveling. And that's what we should be focused on. This rhetoric is not helpful.
I mean, do Democrats see it as fear-mongering? Because I believe actually Senate Democrats did bring it up in their press conference this afternoon that they are concerned that could be the next step. I
hope that's true. And look, and I think Democrats are very concerned about that. And I think this is a part of the conversation that Democrats have been having around ICE and around the National Guard and around those national enforcements coming to the cities and to the states. And so I do think that we've got to give some credence to what Steve Bannon has been saying. Obviously, he and the president have been close in the past, but I do agree.
Long past.
I hope so. But look, what we got to do, we've got to stop and stop pushing back on law enforcement officers who are doing the right thing and protecting us. But we've got to make sure that we don't give too much power to those who are in power to exceed that. And I think ICE is one of those.
All right, Jaime Moore, Megan Mobbs, we hope you'll both come back and join us and take a piece of candy on your way out. Well, that does it for us here on The Takeout. The Daily Report is coming up next.